I never thought I'd end up sharing this story. But here I am, fresh out of college at 23, trying to move forward, only for the past to come knocking in the most absurd way. It all started with a phone call from my mom. I hadn't heard from her in months. No, "Hey, how are you?" or "Congrats on graduating." Nope. She jumped straight into it. "I need $2,000 for your stepsister's dorm fees. Yeah, you heard that right. No warm-up, no catching up, just an instant request for money." I nearly dropped the phone. Let me back up a bit because without the context, you'd probably think, well, it's family. What's the big deal? But this isn't just any family situation. My mom remarried when I was 16. Her new husband, Steve, came with 2 kids, Ashley, who's now 17, and Parker, who's 14. From day one, it was crystal clear that Steve had no interest in me. And my mom? She practically forgot I existed the moment she walked down the aisle. It was like blending the family meant blending me out of the picture entirely. Let's talk about that $2,000. Back when I graduated high school, my grandparents, bless them, gave me that exact amount as a gift. I was over the moon, thinking I'd use it for college or maybe something fun. I'd also saved another $2,000 from part-time jobs, so I had $4,000 sitting in my account. For a teenager, that felt like a fortune. Then one day, I checked my balance and it was all gone. Every last penny. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. My mom was still a co-signer on my account because I hadn't switched it over yet. When I went to her, panicked and confused, she looked me dead in the eye and said she'd taken it. Her reasoning? Punishment. For what, you ask? For not respecting her new husband and his kids? For acting out? I was furious. That money was supposed to help me start my future, and she just took it like it was hers. So, I packed my bags and moved in with my grandparents. They were the only ones who seemed to care about me at that point, and that was the beginning of the end of my relationship with my mom. From then on, our contact was minimal. Birthday cards here and there, the occasional awkward phone call. But that was it. Fast forward to now. I've graduated from college, finally feeling like I've got my life together. And out of nowhere, here she comes, asking me for money. Not for herself, but for Ashley, her stepdaughter. Apparently, Ashley needs a private dorm room because sharing with other people is too much. Like, seriously? What happened to just toughing it out with a roommate like the rest of us? When she made the request, I told her flat out, no way. I wasn't about to hand over money after everything she'd done. And do you know what her response was? "You can't say no. We're family. You have to help." Family? Since when? She hadn't been family to me in years. I hung up after that, fuming. The level of entitlement was unreal. I mean, I haven't been part of her life for years. She's been all about her new family, while I've been out here hustling, trying to make something of myself. And now she thinks I owe her? No chance. After hanging up on my mom, I sat there for a while, trying to process what had just happened. My hands were shaking, my chest was tight, and the audacity of her request kept replaying in my mind. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the sheer nerve. How could she think it was okay to ask me for $2,000 after everything she'd done? The next few days were quieter than usual, but my thoughts were anything but. Every memory I had of my mom played back like a broken record. She wasn't always like this. Growing up, she was my world. It was just the 2 of us after my dad passed when I was 3. We didn't have much, but she made it work. And back then, I thought she loved me more than anything. That changed when Steve came into the picture. When my mom married Steve, it was like I stopped being her priority. Suddenly, everything was about him and his kids. Ashley and Parker were the golden children, and I was just there. My mom bent over backward for them, doing everything she could to make their lives comfortable. Meanwhile, I was left to figure things out on my own. I thought back to my senior year of high school, the year she cleared out my bank account. That wasn't the first time she made me feel like I didn't matter, but it was the last straw. I'd been saving every dollar I could from part-time jobs, money I planned to use for college or maybe a car, and she just took it, like it was her right. Her reasoning still haunts me. You need to learn how to respect this family. This family. Like I wasn't even part of it. After that, I moved in with my grandparents. They welcomed me with open arms, no questions asked. They didn't push me to talk about what happened, and honestly, I was too angry to explain. All they cared about was making sure I was okay. Living with them gave me the stability I needed to focus on school, work, and getting into college. It wasn't easy, but at least I felt supported. But my mom? She didn't even try to reach out after I left. No calls, no apologies, just radio silence. It was like I disappeared from her life, and maybe that was what she wanted. The only time I'd hear from her was during the holidays, and even then it was a quick text or a generic card. No, I miss you, no, I'm proud of you. Just empty gestures that felt more like an obligation than anything else. Fast forward a few years, and here we are. I've graduated from college, landed my first job, and started building a life for myself. And out of nowhere, my mom decides to pop back into my life, not to check in, not to say she's proud of me, but to ask for money. Money I don't owe her. Money I don't even want to think about giving her. The thing that really got to me was how she framed it. We're family. You have to help. Family? Where was that sense of family when I needed her? Where was it when I was working nights and weekends to save up for college, while she was spoiling Ashley and Parker with gifts and trips? Where was it when she chose Steve's kids over me time and time again? I thought about all of this as I sat in my apartment staring at the ceiling. My anger was bubbling just beneath the surface, but it was mixed with something else, something I didn't want to admit. Sadness. As much as I hated to admit it, part of me still wished things were different. Part of me still wanted the mom I had when I was little, the one who made me feel like the most important person in the world. But that version of her didn't exist anymore. Maybe she never really did. 2 days after the phone call, my phone buzzed again. I didn't have to look to know who it was. My mom. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. I wasn't in the mood for another guilt trip. But then she called again. And again. Finally, I picked up, more out of frustration than anything else. "Hello," I said, my voice flat. "Alex, thank God. I've been trying to reach you," she said, her tone somewhere between relieved and annoyed. "We need to talk about what?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. She didn't even hesitate. "About Ashley's dorm. I talked to Steve, and we think we can make it work if you just cover half the cost. It'll only be $1,000 a month." I almost laughed. Only $1,000 a month? Like I'm rolling in cash and just waiting to hand it over. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I already told you. I'm not paying for that." She sighed, the kind of sigh that's meant to make you feel guilty. "Alex, this is important. Ashley needs this dorm. She's not like you. She can't just share a room with strangers. It's too much for her, but it's fine for me to have shared a room with strangers in college?" I snapped before I could stop myself. "I didn't get any help from you, Mom. Not for college, not for anything. So why should I help now?" There was a pause, and I could practically feel her frustration through the phone. "Because you're doing well now," she said, her voice sharp. "You can afford to help, and it's time you gave back to this family after everything we've done for you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Everything we've done for you? What had they done for me exactly? Taking my savings? Made me feel like I didn't belong? Replaced me with a new family?" My hands were shaking, but I managed to keep my voice calm. "I don't owe you anything," I said firmly. "I've made it this far without your help, and I'm not about to start paying for your mistakes. If Ashley needs a fancy dorm so badly, you can figure it out without me." And with that, I hung up. After hanging up, I sat there staring at the phone in my hand. My heart was pounding, and I felt like I'd just run a marathon. Part of me was proud. I'd stood up for myself, said what I needed to say. But another part of me couldn't shake the heaviness that settled in my chest. No matter how justified I was, it still hurt. This was my mom. And somehow, despite everything, I'd still been holding on to this tiny, stupid hope that she might finally choose me. I tried to distract myself, throwing myself into work and hanging out with friends. But the conversations with my mom kept playing over and over in my mind. I'd think of all the things I could have said, how I should have called her out for all the years she'd ignored me, or asked her outright why she thought she could still claim me as family after all this time. But what would it have changed? Nothing. That was the problem. A few days later, Mia, one of my closest friends, noticed something was off. We'd met up for coffee, and I was doing my best to keep things light. But she wasn't buying it. She always had this way of reading me like a book. All right, comma spill, she said, leaning across the table. What's going on? It's nothing, I said quickly, taking a sip of my coffee. Just work stuff. Liar, she shot back with a smirk. Then her expression softened. Seriously, Alex, you've been weird lately. What's up? I hesitated. I wasn't sure I wanted to drag her into my mess, but keeping it bottled up wasn't doing me any favors either. So I told her everything. The phone calls, the guilt trips, the way my mom had resurfaced after all these years just to ask for money. Mia listened quietly, her brow furrowed, and when I finished, she let out a long sigh. Wow, she said. That's a lot. Yeah, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. I just don't get it. How can she act like we're this happy family when she hasn't been there for me in years? And then to ask me for money, like I owe her something. Mia nodded, her eyes thoughtful. It's not fair, she said softly. She doesn't get to pick and choose when to be a mom. And honestly, it sounds like she's more focused on Ashley than on fixing things with you. Hearing her say it out loud made it hit even harder. She was right, of course. My mom wasn't trying to reconnect with me. She was trying to use me. And that realization cut deeper than I wanted to admit. What do I even do? I asked, more to myself than to Mia. It's not like I can just cut her off completely. She's my mom. Mia raised an eyebrow. Is she, though? I mean, biologically, sure. But has she really been a mom to you? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like she hasn't. Her words stung, but not because they were harsh. They stung because they were true. My mom might have given birth to me, but she hadn't been my mom in a long time, and as much as it hurt to admit, I couldn't keep letting her have that power over me. For the next few days, I thought a lot about what Mia had said. I went back and forth, trying to figure out where I stood. Was I ready to cut ties completely? Could I even do that? Or was there still a chance, however slim, that things could change? Then, one evening, I got another call from my mom. I debated whether to answer, but curiosity, or maybe stubbornness, got the better of me. Hi, Mom, I said, my voice flat. Alex. She began, her tone sharp. We need to talk. Here we go again, I thought. About what? About how you've been treating me, she said. I'm your mother, Alex. I raised you. I gave you everything, and now, when I need your help, you turn your back on me? How do you think that makes me feel? I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening on the phone. Mom, I haven't turned my back on you, I said evenly. But you haven't exactly been there for me either. You can't just show up out of nowhere and expect me to forget everything that's happened. What are you talking about? She snapped. I've always been there for you. Really? Said, my voice rising. Were you there when I needed you in high school? Were you there when I was saving for college and you took my money without asking? Or how about when I moved in with Grandma and Grandpa? Did you even call to check on me then? There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought she might actually acknowledge what I was saying. But instead, she sighed heavily and said, Alex, I did what I thought was best at the time. You don't understand how hard things were for me. There it was, the same excuse she always used. I felt my anger bubbling over, but I forced myself to stay calm. I get that things were hard for you, I said, but that doesn't excuse the way you treated me, and it doesn't mean I owe you anything now. She didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold. Well, I see where your priorities are. I guess I shouldn't have expected any better from you. That was the last straw. You're right, I said, my voice steady. You shouldn't have expected anything, because you've given me nothing to build this relationship on. Don't call me again unless you're ready to have an honest conversation. And with that, I hung up. I sat there for a long time afterward, staring at the phone in my hand. I felt drained, but also lighter. For the first time in years, I'd stood up for myself. I'd drawn a line in the sand. And while it didn't fix everything, it felt like a step in the right direction. After hanging up, I stared at the phone for what felt like forever. My emotions were all over the place: anger, sadness, relief. I knew I'd done the right thing, but that didn't make it any easier. Setting boundaries with someone who's supposed to love you unconditionally is one of the hardest things I've ever done. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. That call had been the breaking point, but in a strange way, it also felt like the start of something new. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was taking charge of my life. I started focusing on things that actually mattered: work, my friendships, and most importantly, myself. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when doubt crept in, moments when I wondered if I'd been too harsh, if maybe I should have handled things differently. But then I'd remind myself of everything my mom had put me through. She wasn't interested in fixing our relationship. She was only interested in what she could get from me. I couldn't let myself fall into that trap again. Mia was a huge part of helping me move forward. After I told her about the call, she showed up at my apartment with a 6-pack of beer and a box of cookies. "We're celebrating," she said, grinning as she plopped down on my couch. "Celebrating what?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "You finally standing up for yourself," she said, opening a beer and handing it to me. "Seriously, Alex, you've been carrying this weight around for years. It's about time you let it go." I laughed, but she wasn't wrong. For the first time, I felt like I was choosing myself instead of bending over backward to please someone who didn't deserve it. It was freeing, but it also came with a sense of loss. As much as I wanted to pretend I didn't care, a part of me still wished my mom would step up, apologize, and try to make things right. But I knew better than to hold my breath. A few weeks later, I got a text from my grandma. She and my grandpa had always been my safe haven, the only people who made me feel truly loved and supported. The text was short but sweet. "Proud of you, kid. Come by for dinner soon." When I showed up at their house that weekend, my grandma didn't even wait for me to get inside before pulling me into a hug. "You're stronger than I ever was," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your mom, she's always been difficult, but you've got a good head on your shoulders. Don't let her drag you down." Hearing that from her meant everything. She'd seen firsthand how my mom had treated me over the years, but she'd never interfered unless I asked for her help. I think she knew I needed to figure things out on my own. Sitting at their kitchen table, eating her famous pot roast, I felt more at peace than I had in a long time. Over the next few months, I threw myself into building a life I could be proud of. I worked harder than ever at my job, took up running to clear my mind, and even started sketching again, something I hadn't done since high school. It felt good to focus on things that brought me joy instead of constantly worrying about the past. Of course, my mom didn't make it easy. She sent a few more texts, each one more passive-aggressive than the last. "I guess you don't care about family anymore," one said. "I hope you're happy ignoring the people who raised you," said another. I didn't respond to any of them. I couldn't. I knew if I did, it would just suck me back into the same toxic cycle. One day, she left a voicemail. Her tone was softer than usual, almost pleading. "Alex, I don't know what's happened to you," she said. "You used to be such a sweet, caring person. I just want my son back." I deleted it without a second thought. I didn't need to listen to her twisting the narrative, making it sound like I was the problem. I wasn't the one who'd walked away. I wasn't the one who'd taken from her and given nothing in return. She'd made her choices, and now I was making mine. In the meantime, my bond with Mia grew even stronger. She'd always been my rock, but now it felt like she was family in a way my mom never really was. One night, as we sat on her apartment floor eating pizza, she looked at me and said, "You know you're gonna be okay, right?" I smiled, nodding. "Yeah, I think I'm finally starting to believe that." And I was. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own story. My mom could choose to stay stuck in her version of events, but I wasn't going to let her pull me down with her. I had my life, my people, and my future to look forward to. Months passed, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Life wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was mine. I had built something stable for myself, something no one could take away. It wasn't just about cutting ties with my mom. It was about rediscovering who I was without her constant shadow over me. I spent more time with the people who mattered: Mia, my grandparents, and a few close friends who always had my back. Slowly but surely, I stopped checking my phone, waiting for the next guilt trip message from my mom. I stopped replaying old arguments in my head, wondering what I could have done differently. She wasn't going to change, and for the first time, I was okay with that. My job became a place where I could channel my energy. I started taking on new projects, stepping out of my comfort zone, and even surprising myself with what I was capable of. There was something empowering about focusing on my own growth, not out of spite or to prove anything to my mom, but because I wanted to. It felt good to invest in myself for a change. Mia, as always, kept me grounded. One night, we were sitting on her balcony, a bottle of wine between us, talking about everything and nothing. She had this way of cutting through the noise, saying exactly what I needed to hear. "You know what I've noticed about you lately?" she said, tipping her glass toward me. "What's that?" I asked, bracing myself for one of her infamous blunt observations. "You're lighter," she said simply. "Like, the weight you were carrying, it's gone. Or at least you're not letting it crush you anymore." I let her words sink in. She was right. For years, I'd been dragging around the baggage of my mom's choices, letting them dictate how I saw myself. But now I was learning to let it go. Not because I'd forgiven her. Honestly, I didn't know if I ever would, but because holding on to that anger wasn't helping anyone, least of all me. I thought about my grandparents, about all the times they'd reminded me of my worth when I couldn't see it myself, about the sacrifices they'd made to give me a sense of stability when everything else felt like chaos. They'd always told me I had a choice, to let the past define me or to use it as fuel to build something better. For the first time, I felt like I was choosing the latter. One afternoon, while visiting my grandparents, my grandma pulled me aside. "You've grown so much, Alex," she said, her voice full of pride. "I know it hasn't been easy, but you've handled it with more grace than most people could." Her words meant more than she probably realized. Coming from someone who'd seen the worst of my mom's behavior and still managed to be kind and steady, it felt like validation, like I was finally on the right track. The final piece of closure came in the form of a letter, not from my mom, but from myself. One night, after weeks of debating, I sat down and wrote everything I'd been holding on to. The hurt, the anger, the disappointment. It all poured out onto the page. I didn't hold back. I wrote about how her actions had made me feel, how her choices had affected me, and how I wasn't going to let them control me anymore. When I finished, I didn't send it. I didn't need to. Just writing it down was enough. It was like shedding an old layer of skin, letting go of the version of me that had been defined by her absence and her failures. I wasn't that person anymore. As the weeks turned into months, I realized I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. The pain didn't disappear entirely, but it didn't consume me anymore. It became a part of my story, a reminder of where I'd been and how far I'd come. Mia was right. I did feel lighter. Not because my problems were magically solved, but because I'd finally stopped carrying the ones that weren't mine to bear. My mom could keep living in her own version of reality, but I wasn't going to let it drag me down anymore. I had my life, my people, and my future, and that was more than enough. Looking back, I wouldn't have chosen the path I'd been forced to take, but I wouldn't change it either. It shaped me into someone who knows how to stand up for himself, someone who values the people who truly care. And for that, I'm grateful. So here I am, 23 years old, standing on my own 2 feet. The past is still there, but it doesn't control me anymore. And as for my mom, I hope she figures things out someday. But even if she doesn't, I know I'll be okay. Because for the first time in my life, I'm finally putting myself first.